Hey, thank you for joining us. I think this is going on our third month of doing this webinar. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Dan Medina with Investors Advantage, going on 14 years. We are a money management and financial planning firm located in Westlake Village. For those of you who don't know, we are streaming live on Facebook. Please feel free to invite your friends and family. And we'll also be sending out the webinar after so you can share this with whoever you think might need it. We've been around 40 years and part of a larger group called Elite Financial Networks, a group that manages about $800 million. We are completely independent, and we are the only advisors that we know, aside from one other, that pays for independent research. For those of you who haven't been on our website, please make sure you check it out. We post all of our webinars in the webinar section, along with upcoming webinars. And please make sure to check out the news interviews. We post all of John's interviews, some of which have 40 to 150,000 views. And now the man that needs no introduction, John Grace.
Well, at least not to you, Daniel. Thanks so much. Daniel Medina is our math man, my favorite math man, because it works out real well when you have someone you can depend on to make sure the math gets right. And that's what he does really well, better than I could ever. I worry about the words. And so with the combination of getting the words right as best I possibly can and getting the math right, the beautiful thing about math is you know whether, if you know what you're doing, you know whether or not it's the right answer or the wrong answer. And by the way, math is a four-letter word that Americans need to embrace more than we've ever had in the past. It just keeps you really honest and helps you understand what you're doing and why. So we're going to look as we do, thanks to the research that we've been paying up to $10,000 a year for, starting around 1999. Unlike nearly every other peer that we have, we dig deeper. So we don't just accept the headlines. I don't care who made the headlines, and we don't accept the authoritarian who makes a declaration about something, no matter who they might be, without investigating further to see if this is live or is it Memorex. So we're going to pick up here, and so glad you could join us. And by the way, your comments really help drive the conversations we have every week. And we do exactly this combination of, I talk about the market in terms of what you're not hearing in the news, and then we go to a specialist to talk about something it's something near and dear to their hearts that they think is very important. And I'm delighted to have my good friend, Rob Wynner, 2019-20 super lawyer, Rob Wynner, who's going to talk about the key strategies to keeping really good employees, particularly during a pandemic. So what you saw just on July 2nd, if you missed it, was the president declaring that that we're roaring back. That's a direct quote on July 2nd. But when we dig a little deeper, guess what we find? Another side of the coin, and that is that 40% of Americans are just one paycheck away from being destitute. It's just hard to imagine. So we'll get into that. We'll talk about the 5 key retention strategies. We'll open up for questions and answers, and we do appreciate your questions because it helps us get sharper. So here we go. This is one of those old pictures, right, from the Great Depression. And let me say, like math, budgeting, recession, depression, those are words many of us just don't like to use, and they're just words. But here's the very good news about the Great Depression. According to our research team, DIMP Research, the Great Depression was an event that caused more Americans to become millionaires than any other time in history. Now, you might want to pause and reflect on that, because when we, as I say, these other words that we don't like to use, budget, heaven forbid, math, oh my goodness, depression, recession, we don't want anything like that to happen. Well, maybe we do. And maybe this might help you understand this even better in a very simplistic way. The seasons serve a purpose. Even in California, we have seasons. I know it's hard to imagine, but certainly the seasons serve a purpose for life. And, you know, some things die in the winter. Having gone to school in Minnesota, you were sure that that tree that you kept your eye on that had the nest in it was going to die. And then all of a sudden it sparks all anew, and it's just the most magnificent thing. Some things do die, but some things get stronger. So it is interesting to note that in a bad economic environment, some people got stronger, some people's revenue increased, some people's jobs prospects got improved. Some people took opportunity when prices came their knees, where they just couldn't avoid that opportunity. So they took advantage of it and enjoyed the next wave, if you will. So if we're so busy trying to protect what we hold to be true, or so preoccupied that we won't look at things as they are, we miss opportunities. And in fact, many of us get into the business of, regret. We'll talk about this as well, about how things turned and how it was so different than the way you thought it was or the way it used to be. And as I say, we want to be agile, right? Like those palm trees in Hawaii. We want to be agile with the wind. I just saw a report yesterday that suggests that there are 20 hurricanes that might be stacking up. 20. Who's ready for that? Well, we need to get ready for the good, the bad, and the unforeseen. So that's what we'll be talking about today. So this becomes, as I say, interesting because, again, using the words of President Reagan, we want to trust and verify. And what we saw recently was that as of Friday, the record books were broken on July 1, 2020. The S&P had a 100-day run. That's the best run we've seen since, the S&P's past 100 days are the best we've seen in 9 decades. But again, let's go a little bit deeper under the hood. So if you look at what has happened over the last nearly 9 decades, you can see that's a very, very, very nice picture. But notice to your left. In other words, this is a report that shows what's been happening since 1933. Please look to the left of 1933 and do not miss Great Depression 1. So the best way I can put this by analogy is it's so interesting to me how, when you look at ourselves crossing the street, we're so busy looking at our phones, we're not looking at the traffic. And I mean, let's be really clear. It's hardly ever the bus you see that can disrupt your day. It's the bus you didn't see, you did not time, you could not name, and maybe if you were lucky, you could get the license plate after you peeled yourself up off the pavement. But so many of us are so preoccupied looking at our phones or worrying about what's going on, we're not looking at the traffic. I happened to complete a driving school recently, driving a sports car in Vegas, which was great fun. And I think it was a 22-year-old instructor says, I want to see all of you look like swivel heads. I want to see you in my rear view mirror in the car that you're driving. I want to see you looking to the left and looking to the right. You're on a track, but I want you to practice on the track so when you get home, you continue being swivel heads, looking to the left, looking to the right, and continuing to gather information because, if you didn't see it coming and it was coming, clearly you weren't paying attention to see what was coming. So let's not just look at how good it's been since the last 100 days without looking to the left to see how bad it got when the stock market dropped about 89%. And to put that in perspective, if you had $1 million around 1929, in the time span of approximately 30 days, what was $1 million became $108,000. Just like that, just that quickly. And look a little further, yes, my industry, the securities industry would say, geez, the market always come back. Yeah, it came back in about 25 years, assuming 1, you didn't spend a dime, and 2, you didn't sell a stock. Do you think you didn't need some of that money? Do you think you would have held on to it? Buy and hold and hope, no matter what? And then let's recognize this. If we're an adult in the early 1900s, the life expectancy was what? Mid-50s? So what that suggests to me, and by the way, that's one of the drivers for us to do this kind of work, we need to learn from the past so maybe we don't have to repeat it, because it would be not fun for me and Daniel to help people get set up for, oh, this is going to be a great run, and then find out it falls like, flat right out of the sky. And if it were the case that you were an adult in the early 1900s and the market came back in 25 years, I suggest the market probably came back long after you and I as adults were pushing daisies. So could it happen again? Stay tuned. We think it's worth looking at, not just the good news, but all the news. So let's look to see how bad things might get. And this comes from Jim Cramer, who also had an interesting point on July 2nd, just last week, that the S&P could get ugly in the future. We think he is making a good point. And what he's looking at, he's making a warning signal, if you will, because what the some of the prognosticators are suggesting is that we might see a crash, like you just saw a crash on March 23rd. And recognize, for example, that while the media is so preoccupied with the gains that have been so nice, up to maybe a 40% gain across various markets since the low of March 23rd, the Dow and the S&P are still in negative territory. Only the NASDAQ is in positive territory as of today. So, and to do the math, you know, if you, as we know of one woman who sold out of her position, recognizing a 30% loss, she never got back in. She had no system to get her back in. But if it were the case that she's trying to get back to even, the math, as Daniel would point out to us, is pretty simple. After a 30% loss, we need a 50% gain. So a 40% gain, which is what we've been seeing so far from the trough to today, is fantastic. But if we got out, we need a 50% gain. So we're not quite there yet. And we think those gains may be hard to come by as we move forward. So what you might want to look at is a S&P of about 3280 or 3100. Make it 3100. And make that, if you're looking at the market, what your number, that's a 3100 number you might want to really kind of focus on. Did we blow through it one way or the other? To the upside, that'd be great. To the downside, that might begin to be scary, because as we've come to learn, our investors hate losses more than they love gains. And once we get past 30, 40, 50% losses, the odds of trying to recover just don't tend to be in our favor. So when we look at, you know, in terms of what's going on with the gross domestic product, we see that let me finish that one. When we look at gross domestic product, it looks like it's going to go down as we go through the balance of this year. And I don't know how that's not going to happen. More and more people are saying, is it going to be a V-shaped recovery? Is it going to be a W? Is it going to be, we're playing the alphabet game, okay? Could it be a U with a long bottom? Well, the only thing we have seen historically is an L-shaped recovery. We looked at the Great Depression. Took 25 years to get back to even. That's pretty flat for a long period of time. By the way, New York real estate, about the same time, took about 45 years to get back to even. And then more recently, when we look at Japan, we knew to a person, 1988, 89, Japan was going to be #1 in gross domestic product. That did not happen. I don't think it's going to happen. But let's just recognize that on approximately year-end 1989, the Nikkei, their version of our S&P 500, Nikkei 225, was about 39,000. Last I checked, it was about 22,400. My real point is, it never got back to 39,000 since 1989. Now we're going on 30 years. So that's a real example of an L-shaped recovery, where the peak was here and you know, we're bouncing around well below that peak for a significant amount of time. It's reasonable to me that that history could very well, you know, happen again. So when we look at, one of the concerns we have is about debt. And we can talk about consumer debt, we can talk about corporate debt, and we can talk about government debt. And we are worried about all three. But when we just look at corporate debt, what you can see, thanks to my friend David Stockman, who was with the OMB director under President Reagan, and then spent another 20 years or so on Wall Street. So, you know, those are the kinds of sources we like, where they're not answering to anyone, so they don't have to defend the boss, whether it's the boss on Wall Street or the boss in the White House. We can look at the information the way we see it and help people see it the way it is, as opposed to how we might want it to be. But what you see here is clearly something that's very scary. Governments and companies and people are all doing the same thing, taking on more debt, trying to put effectively duct tape on the problem. You know, enough duct tape, every guy will tell you, will fix every problem, right? Yeah, until it doesn't. And we're afraid that this is one of those balloons that's going to burst. I don't know how we're going to avoid it. And instead of seeing bankruptcies, what we're seeing is the Fed doing everything it possibly can to support, in many cases, zombie businesses. We're afraid of the number of bankruptcies that we think are just around the corner. That news is not playing out yet, so that concerns us. One of the other issues that concerns us in terms of the news that's not playing out yet is the trade war. That's still on the back burner. It hasn't gone away, and we think it's going to get more contentious. So business debt, you just can't, put paint on the pig. It's still a pig. And buying more debt or getting more debt may make you feel good in the short term. But as I say, when the music stops, we all have to get off the carousel. So that's one of the concerns that we have. One of the other concerns we have is effectively the buybacks that companies have. You can see this chart. I mean, the amount of buybacks has just been extraordinary. And that has been really one of the situations that the Fed has encouraged. Now, it's interesting that in one case, it used to be, I think, illegal until 1983. More recently, the Fed has stopped company buybacks. But it's been one of those things, if you're running a company and your income is tied to the value of the stock for the company that you are the CEO for, the CFO, whatever your position might be, clearly you're going to do everything you can to get that stock price up. Now, is that fundamentally sound, or is it just you or me being as greedy as we possibly can? That's the challenge. We don't always see what the motives are. But clearly, if I can juice the company to get it to a higher value that really benefits me, I'm probably going to be doing that with the buybacks coming to a stop. We think that would be perhaps one that we think that has been one of the reasons the market has done so well. We think that would be one of the reasons why the market would not do as well moving forward, because you're just not pumping that kind of money into the system. So this comes from Harry Dent. And what he's concerned about, because we're always looking for smart people, because I'm convinced if I can hang around smart people, it's going to rub off, but it's contagious. That's my point of view. So I do the best I can not to piss them off, so they'll want to hang around with me, and that way I might look a little bit smarter. And this is Harry Dent, head of our research team, Dent Research, where he's looked at the value of private financial assets. And as you see in this chart, as he puts it, it's bubbled up recently. Bubbled up. He chooses his words pretty carefully. And what we see is since late 1994, the ratio has increased to 5.9 times gross domestic product, okay? So it's usually a 3 to 3.25 times, or on average, ranging between a low of 2.9 to 3.6, or way above that those averages. So he's concerned that as we get more and more exposure on a global basis, that there's going to be a reset. And this is what he's suggesting in terms of the U.S. Stands as number one in terms of the most amount of financial assets on a per capita basis per person. He's suggesting that overall there's a reset in the cards. He believes that we have, one of the things that Harry is famous for is saying when he thinks what will happen. Now, let me put this out there first. What we try to say is it's not about the prediction. It's far more about the preparation. Because if I say there's going to be a 6.7 earthquake tomorrow and there isn't, you go, see, you don't know what you're talking about. But if I say we need to be prepared, as we do, for a big earthquake, and it happens, you get to tell the story. And if it doesn't happen, nothing has changed. So we think it's about the preparation to be prepared for the good, the bad, and the ugly. He's suggesting that we need to get our houses in order, if you will, and make sure that when our peers and our friendly financial advisors tell us it's stocks for the long haul, hold and sit and take it. He's saying to his followers, you need to tell them I should be following you most of the time, but right now I really need you to take the time to put an exit strategy for my assets so that I already know in advance before the grits hit the pan that my account won't go down like the Titanic, never to see light at the end of the day. So we think that's an important message. And that's, by the way, what we do. We learned a lot in 1987, 2000, 2008. Notice, by the way, 50% declines in the same decade. Could it happen again? Could it be an L-shaped recovery for the next decade? I submit all of those things are possible. So the tried and true stocks for the long haul, no matter what, we think is problematic for those who need to live off the income, and for those, regardless of age, who don't have the stomach or maybe don't have the time to recover and the stomach to see, a 40, 50, 60% loss in their account. And as I say, I have to imagine looking at Great Depression 1, a lot of people had a lot of regret that they took to their graves. And I just don't want to be a part of that. So we want to help people prepare as well as we possibly can for the good, the bad, and the unforeseen. So that way you don't need a Hail Mary pass just to get back even. If we can limit the losses within some confine of what is acceptable to you personally, not the market, you. Is it 8%? Is it 40%? Let's ask those hard questions. Look at it both from the standpoint of return and dollars, so you see both sides of that equation, and then you make a determination as to what you can live with, and then see if the account might perform within your parameters. So in other words, if you go through these series of questions, we're going to send those to you when we're done here. An 8% loss, you say, I can live with that. But then we go back and look at your portfolio in 2008, and you don't remember, but we can see the data, that the market was off 37% in your favorite mutual funds and exchange traded funds in your diversified portfolio was off 40, 41, 42, 45%. That often is an aha moment for people to go, oh, well, I'm glad we recovered, but I really do not want to try to go through that again, because I'm not sure if we will recover. And even if we do, I don't have the stomach for it. I just don't, there's enough going on. I don't need any more drama. So in terms of preparation and looking at the future, let's turn to my friend Rob Wynner and have him tell us, to pick up on the point, how can employers in particular and employees do what we can to be, highly regarded and wanted, if you will. But what kind of retention strategies can Rob present to us? I think he has 5 of them. And just as a quick background, Rob is a shareholder with the firm Nevers, Palazzo, Packard, Wildermouth, and Wynner. That's Wynner with an I, and you pronounce it as an I, so it's Wynner. Rob always likes to say, yes, I'm a winner. I'm Rob Wynner. That's who I am. And this is a Westlake Village business litigation and real estate law firm. I think I've had the pleasure of knowing Rob about the time that he just moved to Westlake Village, and he was looking forward to leaving the firm in Santa Monica, and he found the firm in Westlake Village. I think it's been a good combination. Personally, he enjoys soccer. He was a great player. He also coaches soccer, and as I say, hanging around smart people is a good idea. Rob graduated cum laude from University of California, Irvine with his bachelor's, and I believe it was Loyola Law School with his Juris Doctorate, also cum laude. So Rob, it's all yours. Take it from here. Give us the 5 key strategies, please.
Well, John, thank you for having me. It's great to be with you today. I have narrowed down 5 strategies to talk about today. I suspect that there's a lot more than 5. I remember when I was a new lawyer, and a lot of my friends from college who decided not to be lawyers but to go into business signed up with companies that gave them stock options, and they would talk about all the stock options they would get and how before they were 35 they planned to retire on these stock options because they were such a great strike price, and that was something that was very valuable to them. And you start to see these alternative arrangements with key talent and employees in times where the economy is simply not as good, or there's a lot of concern about cash flow. So if we can go through a couple slides, Daniel, we'll get to, and skip that one. It's all about me, but John did a nice job. So if you look at the news, you cannot miss the layoffs, the reduction in salaries, reduction in benefits. It's everywhere across a lot of different industries. Entertainment and travel obviously are hit the worst, but you're seeing a lot of normal businesses that are not in those industries suffering, and they're looking for ways to save money, protect cash flow. And a lot of that is to reduce compensation, reduce benefits, no more bonuses, and that creates some tension for key people. If you turn the next slide. This isn't unique to large business. This is also in small businesses. And this article that was in USA Today last month or a couple months ago is talking about Aon, which is a giant company doing all of these things, but also talking about a huge percentage of small businesses suffering the same thing. And most of my clients are small businesses that have anywhere from 10 to 100 or 200 employees, and they're feeling it. Next slide, please, Daniel. So when you want to attract or retain talent, you need another strategy to do that besides paying higher salaries or increasing. No one's giving raises right now, or raises are on hold, salaries on hold. And you want to keep talent, you got to find another way to do it. And this picture down here, it looks like money, but it says stock options with a question mark on it. The idea that you're thinking through with alternative incentive plans is to give the employee a reason to stay other than more cash in their pocket today. We'll go to the next slide. So I really think about incentive plans in two categories. One is cash and one is equity. And for small business owners, equity is the ownership percentage that you have in your business. And cash, in this instance, where we're talking about long-term incentive plans, is the cash that you would receive if you sold your business. And so we're talking about not cash, daily cash flow, we're talking about future cash. So next slide, Daniel. So here are the five. I want to get it out there right away. There's two cash transaction bonus plans, and there's three types of equity plans. And we're going to talk about all five of these. One is a simple cash payment at the sale of the company based on what the owner would get when they sell the company. And the other is a portion, or it's another cash payment, but it's tied to the increase in value of the business from the day that you start the program to the day that you actually sell the company. Equity plans, we'll talk about stock options and equity grants and profits interests. And those are all different types of incentives that involve equity. All right, next slide, Daniel. So the typical cash bonus is you look at your employee and you say, look, you're really valuable to the company, or you will be valuable to a new person you want to attract and retain. When we sell this company, I'm going to pay you a cash bonus based on the sale of the company. And they know then that if they stay employed with the company through a sale, that they're going to get a cash bonus. Just like the cash bonus they would get every year if they did a good job or hit certain KPIs. This one, the KPI is the sale of the company. And there's a lot of different creative ways to set these up. The first one we'll talk about is setting up a pool. You think about the transaction bonus as a percentage of your net transaction proceeds. So after you pay your lawyers and your accountants and your investment bankers, and the money that's left over, that net number, you take a percentage of it and you reserve it into a pool, and then you invite key employees to participate in that pool when there's a sale of the company. And this allows you as the business owner to give different employees different percentages of that pool. And you can use the percentages to incentivize certain behaviors. Like if what you really want is the people to stay with you, so it's time-based, or if you want them to do a certain quality of work or profitability of a certain division, you can award points, you can award percentage amounts, you can do lots of different creative things over time to incentivize people to participate in the company, to stay with the company, and then at the sale, they get a share of the pool. Another simple way is to say, look, if we sell the company and you're with us, we'll pay you $100,000 or $1 million or however much the arrangement is for the employee. The primary requirement, of course, and the reason that we put these plans in place is we want the employee to stay employed in good standing with the company. And so we create an incentive, and we create that incentive through this concept of vesting. So if your bonus for a transaction is going to be at the end of 4 years, and we're planning to sell the company in 4 years, we want the employee to vest over that time. So if you make it as an employee over 1 year, you're 25% vested, 50% after the second, et cetera. If they leave, they quit voluntarily, they don't get anything. So there's an incentive for them to stay. Daniel, next slide, please. So another really fun strategy that some companies will use, and the name is always kind of makes me laugh because it's phantom stock. And really all it is, to make it simple, is the cash bonus that's divided into units or shares so that the company can talk in terms of shares of phantom stock that have some value in the event the company is sold. And sometimes that value is tied to the value of the shares at the time the company is sold. Sometimes the value is arbitrarily selected or even ratchets up over time based on the employee's vesting, achievement of certain vesting milestones. But the idea is that the employee has shares of phantom stock that have a cash value at the sale of the company. And then when there's a sale of the company cashes the employee out with those phantom shares. And again, we use vesting. So there's an example I put in here about if you award 100 shares that vest over 4 years, that would be 25 shares per year vested. And then if the employee stays the whole time, they have 100 shares to cash in, and they get a cash bonus. The thing that you always remember as a business owner is that the phantom stock, even though it says the word stock, it's not stock. It's just the right to a cash bonus at the event of a sale. So there's no voting rights, and there's ordinary income tax and withholdings for the employee when they get paid that bonus. Next slide, please. So stock appreciation rights are a similar strategy. And what's interesting about stock appreciation rights is that you're paying a bonus to the employee that is tied to the increase of value that the employee is participating in as an employee with the company. So if the employee walks in the door for the first day of work and we decide that a share of the company stock is worth $1 on that day, the difference between the value of a share of the company stock on the day the company is sold and that $1, that delta is the metric we use to figure out how much of the cash bonus is going to be paid to the employee. And so we use the same vesting strategies, and we use the same, it's not voting, it's ordinary cash bonus, but it's nice for the business owner to be able to say to the employee, if you increase the value of the company, I will pay you a share of the increase in value. And it's kind of recognizing that the business owner has survived and created value of the business before this employee ever walked in the door. And so we're taking a measurement of value on the day that we start the plan, stock appreciation rights plan, and then we're measuring on the transaction date to figure out the amount. All right, next slide, please. And John, I hope if I'm going too slow or fast, let me know, please. All right. So there's 3 types of equity plans, and I want to just distinguish the fact that cash bonuses that are paid at some day in the future, like in the event of a sale, don't come with voting rights and don't come with rights to annual distributions. And for most small business owners, don't come with the obligation to have an allocation of income or loss on their annual tax returns. So when a small business issues equity to an employee, they're really taking that employee and moving them into this position of more like an owner, less like an employee, at least with respect to this aspect of their compensation. So next slide, please. So an option is what you've heard in the news. You get the right to buy shares in the future to the extent that they're vested at a strike price. And options become in the money when the fair market value of the option, the fair market value of the share is more than the option strike price. So if the strike price is $1 and the company is sold at $2 a share, the options are in the money by $1. The difference between fair market and the strike price. Options are almost always subject to vesting, and the typical vesting period is 4 years, but oftentimes vesting can be tied to specific KPIs, key performance indicators that are milestone driven. So if you have an engineer and the engineer is supposed to finish a big design or a new product design or an enhancement, you can make, as the business owner, you can make that completion a vesting milestone. And so again, we're back to using options to increase the type of performance we want out of the employee. And of course, we want it to be time-based at some respect so that the employee stays. Options are typically issued pursuant to stock option plans that are approved by the board and the shareholders, and they have certain restrictions and rules, but generally speaking, an option gives the employee a right to buy shares in the future. All right, next slide, please. So stock grants are the kind of the opposite of an option. So an option is you can buy shares in the future. A stock grant is the company's going to give you shares right now. And sometimes those shares are subject to forfeiture, which is the same kind of thing as vesting. In other words, the forfeiture restrictions go away while vesting happens. So if the employee stays for the required amount of time or completes a milestone, then they will not forfeit the shares if their employment is over, and they have the right to the value of those shares. The issue that you have with stock grants is that whatever the value of the shares are that are granted at the time, that's taxable to the employee. It's just like you paid them in cash. So there's a tax obligation. And some of the strategies to address those tax obligations, to have the employee buy shares with a note and have the note paid over time with future bonuses. But at the end of the day, the grant, whenever you give your employee something of value, there's tax to be paid. The nice part about a grant for an employee is that it allows the employee to hold the shares for applicable period of time to get long-term capital gains, which today is 12 months. So this allows the employee to own the shares the day they're granted and then hold them for a long enough period of time so when the company is sold, they get long-term capital gains treatment. All right, next slide, please. So profits interest, a lot of my clients today operate their businesses in limited liability companies. And those limited liability companies are most often treated as partnerships. So in order to create equity for employees of limited liability companies, we create what's called a profits interest. Profits interest is equity for the employee, which they don't have to buy, and they're awarded and subject to vesting over time. But they award the profit interest on the day of the grant, And at that day, we try to structure the profits interest so they're worth zero. And the reason we do that is kind of, we take the value of the company on the day of grant, and we'll get an appraisal from a third party. But if you imagine that your company is worth $10 million on the day of grant, you're giving a profits interest, which is a equity that entitles the employee to participate in the excess value beyond $10 million when the company is sold. So if on the day of grant, you're giving a profits interest of 10% and your company is worth 10 million, on that day, you sold the company for 10 million, the profits interest holder would not get anything, it'd get zero. So that zero value allows the employee to get equity and not have income tax on the equity that's been granted because it's worth nothing. But 3 or 4 years later, if the company is sold for 20 million and the profits interest is worth 10% of the excess of the 10, $1 million bonus coming to the employee through the sale of that profits interest, or if the assets are sold through a distribution to the holder of the profits interest. The nice part about this, again, is that the employee can hold the profits interest for the required period of time and realize a better tax treatment with long-term capital gains. So profits interests are typically subject to vesting because, again, all these programs are designed to keep people loyal to the company, encourage them to do what has to be done in order to increase value for the company, and then also reward them for that value if they're loyal and they're successful and the company is successful developing more value for the owners. And I think that's my last slide, guys. Or is there one more? Let's see. Oh, nice legal disclosure. You don't have to read that one, John. So I hopefully, any questions? I did a lot of talking, but.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Rob. And John, your camera's on now, and we do got some questions that came in. First one for Rob, what's your number one tip for employees for retaining top talent?
Well, I mean, the number one thing for employees, what I tell my clients is to engage with them on the long-term planning and explain to them how they're valuable to that plan. And the more that the employees understand their role inside of the company and how they can add value, I always think that's the starting point. You use that then to structure a win-win for the employee and the business. So if you're looking for a key person and you explain to them, our goal in the next 4 years is to create, this much EBITDA and this much transaction value on a sale. And if we do that, part of it will be yours. That usually aligns your key employees with shareholders, and we get to a better result. So always thinking about aligning interests with key people.
Or as we might put it, have more skin in the game, right? The more skin everybody has in the game, the better the game, perhaps?
Well, certainly employees, especially right now, employees don't like to make the investment in the company.
Sure.
Like asking an employee to take out the checkbook and write a check and buy shares into the company is not what I've seen a lot of happens. Most of that is subsidized by the employer. But what you can do is you create an environment where the employee can, by being successful and by being loyal and staying with the company, can earn a part of the sale proceeds at the end. Every company, almost every company, is going to have some exit. You mentioned planning for a negative market response. Well, small businesses plan for an exit. You can't just assume you're going to be in this business forever. Some things can happen, bumps along the road. But if you can align the interest for your employees so that they want to exit also, the same way you exit, now interests are aligned, and now it's a win-win. And there is skin in the game, because if you work for 4 years toward getting a piece of the transaction value, you're less likely to leave because you want that piece. So in that sense, they're creating skin in the game.
Excellent. Good answer. John, did you mention that people are one paycheck away? Where did you get that source?
Oh, yes, thanks. We like revealing our sources because that tells you we didn't make it up. I saw it on, it's kind of interesting because it was on CBS News. I believe the source was Prosperity Now that did a study. But the real piece of the data, the information I think is most interesting, this was January 2019. So this was long before COVID became a household fear. And it's one of those things that we can see the same kind of story being replicated in the UK, other countries around the world. So we're really all in this together. And the way I look at it is, you know, if it's we're off to the races, if everything's just going back to normal, well, let's make sure that's true for as many people as possible, as opposed to just the top 1% where all the money seems to accrue and they're going to do just fine for the most part, no matter what. So, yeah.
Excellent. Rob, what does it take to set up some of these plans, and what's the ongoing cost?
It sounds like you got some gardening going on. You
Get
know,
a haircut.
yeah, it depends. You know, as you go down and you set up equity plans to give people equity, the cost becomes substantially higher on the front end to document everything. There's not really an ongoing cost. I suppose there's some plans that involve equity investing can be set up so that there's an annual valuation, 401 valuation required. But generally speaking, there's some upfront cost to document a plan, a transaction bonus plan, or a stock option plan, or an equity plan. And usually the cost from a law firm to document everything is anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. And then there's often some third-party appraisal that's required, which can range between another $5,000 and $10,000 or even more, depending on the company. But for transaction bonuses that involve cash in the future, those don't need that extra work, and typically it can get done for $2,000 to $3,000.
And Rob, you work a lot with mergers and acquisitions. So my question would be, how do you? We have a number of company owners, and they seem to come up with these imaginary numbers in terms of what the value of the company is.
Right.
How do you get their feet on the ground to look at the actual numbers as opposed to the imaginary numbers? Or how do you help them get their ducks lined up in such a way so that within 5 years, not 5 minutes or 5 months from now,
Right.
that kind of number that you imagine could actually be more forthcoming?
You know, it usually starts with the financial statements and figuring out what discretionary earnings are in the company. And, you know, discretionary earnings can include a lot of add back expenses in your business. You know, if you're paying for, you know, your kids working in the business, or you're paying for their cars, or you're covering insurance for them, you add all that back, you figure out what the discretionary earnings are, and then you study the multiples for your industry and understand what companies are trading for. So what I do as a lawyer is I bring in an investment banker or a business broker who understands these, you know, understands the market, and we sit down and we go through the financial statements, and we have a professional, which is going to often include the CPA, but a business broker or an investment banker, give a reasonable analysis about where things are today for the business. And then we use, you know, financial planners and business management consultants to work through strategies to identify areas to improve that profitability and discretionary earnings and growth, and to achieve a multiple on EBITDA, or a multiple on discretionary earnings.
Excellent. Next question for you, John. What helps us see which candidate is most likely to be president?
Great timing for that question, right? Well, some people look to the polls. And but the two ways I think give you a better way to kind of evaluate who might win is either watch the stock market for like 3 months before election day. And if it's going up, that's typically good for the incumbent. And if it's going down, that's typically good for the opponent. So that's that one I think is pretty strong. The third way might be the strongest, and it's also the easiest. Just look at the online betting. See where folks are putting their money. And that I think has had the most success in being able to forecast who the winner is likely to be. I mean, nobody can see the future, but it is nice to be able to put some light on the road around the corner with their GPSs and some of these tools to get a handle. We don't have to wait necessarily for election night.
Is this something you can bet on in Las Vegas, John?
Well, yes.
I just heard.
Yes.
I believe they do have lines for that in Vegas.
100%.
Oh, wow.
We're not making that as a recommendation. You know that. It's not something we do. It's not something we handle in any way, shape, form, or fashion. I'm just trying to answer your question as well. But yes, absolutely. You can bet on just about everything in Vegas.
Excellent. Okay, in the interest of time, we're going to start wrapping up. And John, what do we have for next week?
Well, let's see. One of the things that we find with so many folks, as I was saying earlier, math. I love talking about presidential candidates. I was fond of Andrew Yang for wearing his math button on his suits and his sport coats. I've never seen a candidate trying to run for office wear that kind of a word on their suit. And clearly, math is a 4-letter word that we just need to understand, as opposed to slough off and say it's too complicated. Daniel, you'll figure it out. Give me the answer. Because see, here's the problem. As soon as you give your power to someone who's dishonest, you don't know whether or not they're cheating you. So we need to do the math. And we have a gentleman who's been a longstanding client who has, been not afraid of the word budget and has always managed to live within his means and make sure that he always set some money aside. So he'll be talking about some of the practices that he learned and how he looked at things in different ways so that he could see where he might have some of the things that he liked for less as opposed to paying top dollar, and always had a consistent amount of money that he wanted to set aside. He has achieved financial independence, and it's kind of interesting that he's taken in a relative who bought a car, and lo and behold, this is hard to believe, Rob, that it was a used car, and I believe it was in Vegas, and the deal was, it's no interest for the first year unless you miss your first payment. Then the interest rate becomes, what was it, Daniel, 89%? Some ridiculous number, which immediately means, you're in serious trouble and you don't know it. So we're going to look at budgeting and how a good client has managed to achieve financial independence and maintain it. He's been out of work, or he retired, Daniel, maybe 5 years ago now?
He retired, about 5 years ago.
About 5 years ago. So it's an ongoing job, if you will, to make sure we look at the money that we have and to get in the habit of spending less than we're earning, as opposed to what so many of us have been doing, which is trying to act like the Kardashians, and we're not making that kind of bankroll, but we're trying to look like we do. So that's what we'll be talking about next week. Look forward to your joining us for that. Please invite family, because it's just something we all need to be better at. And then we'll be talking with another real estate lawyer, but it'll be dedicated around the subject of real estate, how people can work together as a purchaser of real estate, how we've seen clients where the parents are just so cute. Well, we want this house to go to this person, that house to go to this kid, and we just want to take care of our kids. And then unfortunately, one or both of them pass on. Now the kids are fighting over the damn house that mom and dad were so proud to leave. So we want to help people see around that conundrum, if you will, to recognize what you were so proud of yourself for doing may have made it like a nightmare for your family. Now they're not speaking to each other. The two sons are not speaking over the house mom and dad gave the two sons that's paid for. I mean, geez. So yeah, there are a lot of things we can learn from each other as opposed to just repeat each other situation. All right. So yeah, the last 4 months, this has been what a ride, right? It's like been on a rocket ship. almost every minute, not just every day. But if you weren't prepared for the last 4 months, we would submit to you that you're probably not prepared for the next 20 years. And as I say, the problem that I have with our industry that I've only been in since 1979, I apologize for my peers, because typically the only message we have conveyed, stocks for the long haul, hold and hope, sit and take it. And that works when you don't need the money. I'm going to say to you that practice that was your friend becomes your foe when you need or must take required minimum distributions from traditional retirement plans, on top of seeing hurricanes just watch your asset base like 2008. Worst it got was off 57% from peak to trough. Take a 3% withdrawal on top of that, and that's just 30,000. 57% is 570,000. 570 plus 30 is 600,000. So imagine starting retirement in January, on January 1 with $1 million, 2008, being 7.5, having to take 3.65 is what you're required to take out of your account. Let's just make it 3% to keep the math simple. And after the market hurricane at 57%, your downturn was 600,000 from $1 million, leaving you with 400,000. Have a nice day. Well, we know you can do better than that, but if you can't see some of the distinctions and how to employ technology to your advantage, we're just left saying exactly what we said 40 years ago, which was appropriate then, but a lot of things have changed in the last 40 years. And frankly, our peers tend to be lazy as hell, and we do not come to you in a forthcoming way to say, here's how we might be better prepared for the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that's part of the reason we are doing what we're doing. And by the way, we do not see one of our peers dedicated to this kind of information. Y'all come every week at 3 o'clock, and we'll continue because Daniel and Jasmine, who's on maternity leave, having her third child, God bless her, they think this is a real good idea for me to do this. So guess what? I'll keep doing it. Join us next week, and may God bless you. May God bless America, July 2020.